Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. Man, it feels like it's been forever since I've been on this. I've had something going like every week. Anyway, we are here with our panel. First off, we have Dan Shapir.
Hey from Tel Aviv, coming on a good connection finally.
We also have Steve Edwards.
Yo, coming at you from the Portland area in Oregon.
AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you from Latin. Yeah, we'll just go with that.
Nice. I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. We have two special guests this week. We have Yaroslav Lapin. I hope I said that right. Coming from our neck of the woods. He said he was from Utah, and I was like, oh, I know where that is. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Yaroslav. Most people know me like on the internet as JLRK, and I'm here. Today, I think is like the record-breaking like hit should be happening, so we will see.
There we go. We also have Andrei, who's rocking an awesome beard.
Hey, how's it going? Calling it from just north of Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, beautiful out there.
I think this is the first podcast I've done with somebody in their car.
Yeah.
Yeah, not in my electricity went out at the house, so I had to escape downtown to a good Verizon connection.
Gotcha.
Oh, it's also an air conditioning, I would guess.
No, I'm gonna roast.
He's gonna roast in that car. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope the phone doesn't get too hot. I'm gonna if it starts to warn me, I will turn on air conditioning. I think it's actually illegal to idle in California.
You're not that far from the border.
It's true.
Coming to you live on the highway to Nevada. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about the B2B SaaS Kit. And the way I've decided I kind of like starting these is just by describing what the problem is. Like, it's like, why do we need this? Or what are people doing that this makes it easier to do?
There's like the problem why we started building it. And then there's I think there's like the real problem. And then there's the problem that we tell everyone about. So so the real problem is that we've been having a really difficult time getting people to learn about our for-profit SaaS product, right? Which is a customer support solution. And so we started thinking about ways to, tell people about it. And traditionally, what most folks do is they'll start like spamming. They'll start sending cold emails or they'll buy ads. You can do blog posts. You can go on podcasts. And all of that takes time and money and is it's also not particularly creative, right? So we kind of went back and we were like, so why aren't people discovering us organically? And we thought, well, maybe it's because there isn't like a recipe on the internet even where you can go and like build a B2B application that has all the components necessary to run a B2B application. And we thought if there was one like this and we were like a small optional part of that recipe, then maybe people would start discovering us. It's a really roundabout way to do some like marketing, I guess. Mm-hmm. But what the outcome of that is a pretty cool sort of a side project, right? The B2B SaaS Kit, which has very little to do with Fogbender itself, with our for-profit startup. But it's been and I think the bigger problem that we kind of began to understand is that there just isn't a way to spin up a fully functional B2B app and our target is like, you just got laid off from Google or from Meta or, and you have a lot of experience, you're a senior engineer and this problem, right? You're an expert in some field. The last thing you know how to do or want to do is like set up authentication, set up product analytics and all this other stuff. And what you want to do ideally is just jump into coding business logic for your whatever your insight is, whatever you think your business is going to be. So we tried to come up with a way to present like this kit that someone like that could spin up in a weekend and actually start playing around with an actual audience, with actual users, really, really quickly. And whether we're a part of it or not is at this point not like that even that interesting.
So basically, to really get to the gist of it, and again, by listening to your description, and also obviously also looking at your website, or the website of this project, actually, it's an opinionated collection of services and libraries and frameworks that you kind of bundle together, right? In to come up with an opinionated starting point for the development of SaaS B2B solution.
Yeah, and some of it is opinionated. Like I would say all the open source stuff is very like Astro, super opinionated, even Tailwind. I think that the B2B specific things like Propel Auth, I don't think that's opinionated. There's literally one other B2B user authentication solution, which is Clerk, and nothing else. And when I say by B2B is like org management, right? So as a customer, I sign up and I invite my colleague. That's hard to build. Those two things offer it off the shelf. Fogbender is also the only off-the-shelf B2B support solution where we assume that the user is a team of people and not just a single individual. In other words, if you signed up as a team and a member of that team has a question, if the vendor is using Fogbender for support, by default, the entire customer team is going to see that question and be able to respond and see the vendor's answer. So those are less opinionated, but yeah, everything else is, especially open source stuff, pretty much. Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about it in those terms because, I mean, I've used a lot of these authentication solutions or support solutions or things like that. And the focus is always on user base, right? Like a single person. And so, the assumption that, hey, look, I may be dealing with, and realistically, as I've done different things or worked with different applications and connected with their support. If I connect with support and my virtual assistant, I have two of them, connects with support, on the same issue, we're working on 3 different support tickets or, to get them access to something, right? I add them as a team member, but then they interact with the software as themselves, as an individual instead of as part of my team a lot of the times. And that's pretty inconvenient. And so, that's interesting and an interesting take on what we're doing here. I'm guessing that, Astro, React, Tailwind, a lot of that is just a matter of how you design your software. But, the way these others plug into it, that's really interesting to me.
So when I looked at it, and I also told Yaroslav about it, the first kind of thing that it reminded me of, and it's interesting also to think about this in the context of a category. But one of the things that reminded me of is Ken C. Dodd's Epic Stack. But it took me a bit of time to figure out the difference in focus that you're describing. That one is primarily for B2C, where you assume individual users, and one supports B2B, which means you need to be able to, like you said, consider a group of users as a single entity. Now, obviously, that entity may contain like a party of one, in which case, so your superset, I guess, of the scenario that Epic Stack is specifically targeting. But like you also said, it kind of limits the options available for some of the parts that you chose because you needed to have that capability to work with groups.
Yeah, I wanna actually address the Epic Stack comparison, but just going a bit back to this thinking of when we created Fogbender, we needed to showcase a widget. So some people are like, hey, we're using Next.js, we are using Nuxt, right? So how do I integrate into your system? And the question was okay, is there a template where we can use auth right away? Because what we ended up doing were things where we just have hard-coded values because there is no easy way to authenticate users, moreover authenticate teams and all of that stuff. But now in B2B SaaS Kit, it's kind of hey, here's user ID, here's org ID. That's kind of all taken care of you. A lot of the starter projects, the whole category, if we start with create next, create T3 app, right? They will give you kind of base framework, maybe a few add-ons on top of it. So maybe Tailwind or TRPC, but they're not giving you too much into kind of application code. That's where you would usually use generators if you're talking about Laravel or Rails. Or I think Laravel actually has a few templates where it's more app based, and even one of them I think has has teams management, but not everyone wants to use PHP, and it's especially just for one feature, right? And yeah, so all of those starter things, they usually are limited to kind of testing or pre-tier. So kind of lower level, just tools. They don't go into application. So our thing is a bit more kind of higher level starting point. So in a in a comparison between Epic Stack and B2B SaaS Kit, the difference is Epic Stack is a thing for you to start your project. Yeah, you know what you want to do. You don't want to do kind of boring parts, and you start right away. Our thing is more how you start a business. we already have kind of a product that your team can go in and sign up and through Stripe, right, and have a billing, team-wide billing, team-wide support and all that stuff. So it feels just a bit higher level. And going back to opinionated, I think Epic Stack is a bit more opinionated. So Kant is, I know the best framework Remix. I know the best UI library this one, right? So he picks all the tools that he is considered the best, and that's kind of the only thing that is supported. For us, it's a bit it's a bit more open-ended. So a lot of the tools that we provide, they're optional. So the only way for you to kind of to sign into the app is to have you need to have SQL. Otherwise, we don't know what to show you, right? We don't have the data, and we need authentication. Otherwise, how are we going to show you your dashboard, right? So those things are required. You have to set it up. Everything else is optional. So if you don't want Stripe, you want to use something else, sure, just don't configure the Stripe and replace it with something else. But that's kind of on your time. We can't support every possible kind of permutation of the thing, and we are not claiming that this is the best possible. So for example, we use Vercel for hosting, but we also have documentation on kind of how to undo things. So if you go to if you start it locally and you go to /eject, it will show you documentation hey, here's how you get rid of Tailwind if you don't like it. Hey, here's how you can use a different hosting solution if you don't like the Vercel, right? So we're a bit we're a bit less sure in that this thing is the best possible and no one should use anything else. We will provide you with instructions on how to kind of how to undo some of that stuff. And yeah,
It's interesting, like, to think about it this way, that, we had frameworks, and then we had meta frameworks, and now it seems like we're getting this new category of meta frameworks.
Yeah. And then there's going to be the next layer where you just describe to AI kind of roughly what you want, and then that becomes a meta framework.
Well,
just builds a business for you.
I think we need more variety in stuff like what you're building. We need more of what you're building. We need what you're building, and we need more of it and more variety of it, because there's too much of this Facebook does this or Google does this, therefore I'll do this, which is not at all suited to real business needs or real scalability for the type of application that you have. Because most likely, if you have a business, most people, if they have a business, you have to exchange a good or service for money, whereas Google and all these big companies are just trading funny money and stocks and investors, and there's no product at the end of it. It's a completely different use case.
Yeah, or they close it right away, right? So like we're already on a countdown for them to close threads, right?
My opinion is that like it's good to have a one-way, like sort of a, this is how you do stuff. I think that's for someone trying to build a business. That's not a bad message, Like if I see this is working, this was kind of like my hope, I think, with the sample app. If you see it's working and you see it's doing roughly what you want it to do minus your business logic, then my hope was that we'll find enough people who are like, that's good enough for me. Like I'll just use whatever these, because once you start getting super opinionated, then the only way to really do stuff is to build everything from scratch. More or less.
Yeah, it kind of depends what you mean by from scratch. But going off of what you just explained, it's worth stating that really the steps with what you created is that you effectively go to your website, copy the instructions, which are essentially to clone a repo, and run the command line command, and you're off to the races, as it were.
Yeah, it gives you a pretty nice locally hosted landing page, and then from there you can there's yet another set of very simple instructions. You basically go to a setup page that gives you a bunch of steps, of which only the first few are mandatory and the rest is optional. And so essentially, like you install Doppler, which is a secrets management service with a very generous free plan. Then you basically learn how to launch the app through Doppler so that all the secrets are picked up. You learn how to use the command line to set secrets and to read them. Then you basically sign up for Supabase. It's a free account. You get a free database. You hook that up, and then you, or maybe I'm reversing the order. You set up Propel Auth, which is the user authentication service. And at that point, like basically you have a working app, and everything else becomes kind of extra. Okay, well, here's how you also add a customer support component. This is how you also add product analytics with PostHog. This is how you also add billing. This is if you want to enable sign in with GitHub, you go, this is how you do it through Propel Auth. If you want to buy a domain, we send you to Domainer. It's my friend's very cool domain search service. And then you, in this case, you use Vercel to deploy it with GitHub, right? With a GitHub integration. So it's sort of like this. Our goal is to start to give you like literally 3 steps initially, so you can just see that something is working. Then ideally you would be drawn into trying, more and more steps. And we're certainly seeing people doing it, because we have some product analytics. Obviously, it's all like pretty meta. But yeah, there's been essentially a and this is a stark contrast to Fogbender, which has very little traffic or customers. B2B SaaS Kit is someone's always on there like doing stuff, which is kind of cool. And we just launched it too.
Yeah, but the idea is that we show you like the sample app that has kind of like enough moving pieces that when you look at it, you're like, oh, I know how to add like my thing into this, and it's like a working product. And we give you with like all the documentation on how to set it up and some documentation like how to basically like use it later. And we had like people try to go through all of these instructions, and they're like, if they know English, it's usually kind of like enough, which turned out to be a problem because like we asked like few people on Upwork to just like go through instructions and try to set it up, and like you can just see how much like how how English basically correlated with how far they could get through the instructions. But in the end, everyone did. So it's really kind of like it's a difference between like I'm hiring like two teams, one in Brazil who's going to do my like app, one is Germany who's doing to do like my PHP backend, and I just hope that in 6 months they can talk to each other and can like make a login form, as compared to like something that you can get and like set it up yourself, even though you're like semi-technical, right? You just know how to read English, and you can get it, and you can get a feeling that you kind of like you don't have like a weather app that like there are like 1,000 tutorials on YouTube. You get like a real app.
One of the benefits of being open source is assuming you get enough traction. I can pretty well assume or guess that somebody will translate everything to, the relevant languages from English.
Problem is that these other services we're using, we're heavily relying on their UI, and none of them, I don't know, maybe some of them are, maybe Supabase is available in other languages, but most of them are not. So at the end of the day, like there's still
even Astro.
No, Astro I'm sure has some, but as you don't need anything from Astro.
Yeah, just run one command to start it, and that's the extent kind of like of you using Astro.
Since we brought up Astro, I do have a question in that specific context. So first of all, I need to start by saying that I really like Astro. I think it's great. Obviously, as a performance nerd, I'm really happy with the score, the Core Web Vitals score that people usually get when they use Astro. So nobody should misconstrue my intention that I dislike Astro. But I do have to ask about the fit of Astro for your specific use case, because when the people from Astro describe the best or the optimal types of websites that are appropriate for Astro, they usually talk about content websites and less about applicative websites. And you, on the other hand, seems to be specifically targeting applicative scenarios. So why did you choose Astro over, I don't know, Solid, Quick, Svelte?
Yeah, I like to talk
Next.js,
about
God
this.
forbid.
Yeah,
it's even from Vercel.
Yeah, exactly. And that's going a bit back to like our idea of like having kind of like eject instructions. We when we started, we kind of like tried different ideas of like, can we just like build everything on top of Supabase? Can we build like everything on top of Vercel? Because like they all have some kind of auth, some kind of like database and all that stuff. Like how much do we want to like depend? How much we want to like bet everything on like one provider? And in the end, we set up like this setup where it's like everything is kind of replaceable. If you don't like Supabase database, just pick any other kind of like SQL thing, and it will work. And that kind of like approach of flexibility is also like the reason why we're using Astro, because Astro is in my mind is really flexible, and I'm not the only one who thinks that like Solid Start and 10-stack Start are going to be built on top of Astro, even though they are like full-blown kind of like application frameworks, right? Because Astro, in a way, it's just it's kind of like full stack Vite. So Vite is really kind of like popular libraries for building web frameworks, And Astro just does that, plus it adds you like a server integration part. So if you're building a framework, like Dan Abramov recently published an article of like, hey, let's build React Server components from scratch. And Jesse Pence on Twitter did like a dramatic reading of that article, and he created like all of that stuff in Express.js. And I went to his thing and I quickly built it on top of Astro. So it's like you can build basically anything on top of Astro. And there are like two answers to that. So like one answer is if you're using application based framework, what you will end up doing probably is creating a separate website for your landing. Or you're doing your landing in Next.js, and I can clearly see that because it's like it has 30 scores on Lighthouse. It's like it's immediately obvious when people are like, oh, it's fine, we can use React on landing. And we used it as well, and we also
I do have to interject on this point.
Sure.
Because it's an important. I know that you were saying this kind of in jest, but I do have to. It's an important conception or misconception that some people have. So I have this talk that I'm giving at some conferences where I do a performance comparison between the various frameworks and meta frameworks. And at the very end, what I say is that I look at the ratio of what's the probability, you might say, that you'll build a fast performing website using any one of the frameworks. And what I say is that none of the frameworks have a good ratio of 0%, which means that you can build a fast website using any framework, even Angular. Yeah. Likewise, no framework is 100%, which means you can build a slow website using any framework, even Astro or Quick. So yeah, it's more of a question of how much the framework works for you rather than maybe against you, or increases the likelihood or probability that you build a fast loading website. And just as a specific case in point, at Next Insurance, where I work, our landing page, our homepage, as our marketing website, the landing pages, the homepage, the blog, etc., are all built on Next.js and all have fine scores.
Can you share me a URL and I will check?
Yeah, especially Core Web Vitals. Lighthouse is like, it's okay, nothing to write home about, but it's okay. But what's really important is what you get with Core Web Vitals, which reflects the experience of your actual users. But yeah, it's also because they've hired me. And
exactly. I'm not saying that like every Next.js website is slow and every Astro website is fast.
No,
I'm just saying that like the baseline or like the average is going to be different, and you can quickly see that.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I definitely do mention at my talk, is that the differences in probabilities can be pretty substantial. So yeah, your choice of framework definitely does have a potentially significant impact on the likelihood that you will build a fast website. But again, going to your choice, given that you're building on Astro, does that mean that by definition the web application that I build is a multi-page application or an MPA? And if so, what are the consequences of that, if any?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. the long answer is that, like, as I was saying, that usually ends up in people building kind of like two apps, so one for landing and one for application, and they will use the, like, I forgot how they called it, but like Squarespace or something like that for like a landing, just because it's like it has completely different kind of like performance or like even content management kind of like requirements. So it's going to be like just a different thing. So because Astro is much more flexible, you can build all kinds of app with it. And answering the like SPA question, So what we have on promptswithfriends.com, which is currently like our like example app that is showing off all the kind of like features that we have. On that app, we have kind of like three distinct applications that are built in like in different ways, so that we can showcase like how, well, basically how what kind of answer Astro has for this question. So when you go to the landing page, or you go to like setup page or eject page, those are like MPA pages. So when you click between them, you will see like the full loading, spinner, all that stuff, full page navigation, all that stuff. But like they don't have any JavaScript. The only JavaScript that we have is like on the setup and eject pages. It's like it's like a bit nicer like animation when you like collapse or expand things. If you turn off your JavaScript, it will still continue working. That's kind of like this progressive enhancement kind of like story, right? So like here, if your application is really simple, or you have like documentation website or something like that, you can use this approach. Next, we have /survey application. I don't think we have like links to it yet, but it's basically completely create React app with style application. If you turn off your JavaScript, it's a blank page. That's kind of like that's what we use at Fogbender, by the way. Like on Fogbender, like landing page and our blog is in Astro, but our /admin route is kind of like this Vite or create React app style application, but it's still through Astro.
So roughly stating it, the parts of your website that are SEO'd or are indexed by search engines, those are mostly built to be, able to function with or without JavaScript. They work mostly as multi-page applications. But that part of your site that's really an app and probably requires authentication or something like that, so it's not really relevant for search engines anyway. That part is built with JavaScript as a single-page application.
And I want to say that it's like a mix as well. So I mentioned like our landing, our survey, and we'll also have /app. App is what I call Remis architecture. So it's modeled kind of like after Remix framework, and it's using Remix router, which is like React router, right? And it's a full-blown kind of like SSR framework. So you will get initial rendering on the server. You can do like, hey, if user doesn't have a cookie, redirect him to login page. Like all of that stuff is built in. And that application itself has two parts. It has /prompts, which is our like public. Andrei, you probably should mute yourself. There's some noise. There is like /prompts, which is public, and it's indexable by Google. It has like OG tags and all that stuff. And again, it's done through this like what I call Remis thing. And you have like a completely kind of like behind notification /app, and they use the same like Remix router. So they like when you go between pages, it will be single page application, client side navigation, kind of like navigation without full page reload. So that's the kind of like the answer of like, yes, I know that Astro is only focusing on the content thing, but the tool itself is versatile. You can build any application on top of it.
Yeah, and I also have to say that I kind of spoken about this with I think with Fred as well from Astro, and certainly with Ryan Corniato from Solid, and also with Mishko from Quick and others. I don't like these distinctions so much at the end of the day. From my perspective, when people reach out for a framework /meta framework these days, they might you might make it more appropriate for certain things, but at the end of the day, you pretty much need to support everything because people, we like to say use the best tool for the job, but at the end of the day, there are like just so many tools people can be really, proficient with. So people tend to reuse the same tools for everything at the end of the day, from my experience at least.
I think there's a big business case to be made too for using something like Astro, which again, I don't care, right? As long as it works, that's my approach. But I know that
That's a good approach.
I know that the management and administration of two different websites provides a huge overhead, right? And we've done this at our previous company. We had like our blog, which was all of our lead gen was through organic Google search, right? So it was a really important thing, but it was hosted on Ghost, like some server somewhere that we didn't even really know who has access. Like, it was really difficult to manage. Certainly was not part of our code base, all those blog posts. I knew it was awful. It was truly awful. And then before we figured it out with Fogbender, where we now have a mono repo that has our blog, it has our app, it's all in one repo. It's actually really easy to manage. We can kind of, we have a single hash that kind of definitively determines what version this is. It was also difficult just from like access perspective, management perspective. So I actually think as a small company with very few people, it's also much easier to host it all in one repo in one place, where you have like one set of merge requests. You have the same set of users inside of your version control, GitLab, GitHub, whatever. It's just been easy for us, I think, to manage a relatively complex thing, and again, like, we have something to compare it to. So that's my approach. Is like, is this better? It's better. Great.
Also, you don't want to silo your developers, especially when it's a small company. I mean, can you really afford to have like two developers that you can't, that aren't interchangeable because each one of them specializes like in a particular set of technologies and they only know how to work on their part of the overall thing? That's really problematic from my experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, though, depends on how closely interchangeable some of this stuff is. And I have to say, some of these, what did you call it, Dan? A meta framework?
Yeah.
A lot of these that go together, we need a better term for it, but a lot of these, what you wind up getting out of it, and I don't know if this is something that you all are doing, is you get something that looks a whole lot more like, hey, we've got integration points for all this stuff. So at the end of the day, if you're doing the Astro stuff or the React stuff, right, because you include them both, or whether you're doing, something in this area or that area, you kind of pull things together so that for the most part, the Astro, if you squint at it, looks a whole lot like the React, and you make it easy so that, yeah, you may have people who are working in both arenas, but the crossover or the overhead for knowing this stuff is a lot simpler.
Yeah, I wanted to go into a bit like the same kind of like question about the backend, because one other kind of like decision that we made, right, is to use JavaScript on backend, which is not controversial like these days, but it used to be a much bigger deal.
Well, I'll say it, JavaScript backend. Ew.
Well, it's not 100% true, though, is it? I mean, Astro isn't exactly a JavaScript backend, is it? I mean,
so we can go a bit into that. So the idea is that at Fogbender, for example, we don't have any JavaScript on the backend. We use Elixir, and this is again kind of like marketing thing. Like, we could build B2B SaaS Kit with Elixir backend, but the like amount of people who are going to be like excited about it and will try it, it goes down dramatically, right? So this is.
Are you using Phoenix? Can I just ask? No.
We're
what are you
too
using?
old. We are like we're started with Erlang like more than 10 years ago. So like we're only switched to Elixir because of like the kind of. Anyway,
there's a lot to like there. Anyway.
Yeah, I know, and exactly like would something like that built like on only like Elixir, like Phoenix Live View, would that be cool? Yes, but like it's a bit harder to find a hosting for it. It's harder to find people for it and all that stuff. So like we have somewhere like in our reject instructions, like, yeah, probably like the backend, like if you're building like a real app, probably like the backend is the first thing to go. You will create like a real backend.
I don't
I
like
don't
the term
know.
real. I don't like the term real backend. I have to tell you.
Well,
I'm joking, by the way.
I know a lot of people who have built really robust things on top of Supabase or Firebase. So
Yeah, I think eventually it runs into cost at the end of the day. So,
yes, that's usually
it really just
yeah.
it depends on scale, and also when it comes to concurrency. If your app really needs concurrency, like a messaging apps tend to, then you may win by using runtime that's kind of inherently designed for it. But if it's like prompts with friends, does that need to run on an Erlang VM? No, it does not. Like, there's really no reason to do it.
So
yeah, and I'm sorry.
No, so for your backend, basically what you're saying is that you, again, given that it's based on Astro and React, you're kind of using Astro for the quote unquote more static stuff and React on the backend and front end for the quote unquote more dynamic stuff.
Yeah, so it's like a really fun question to answer because there is no. It's not like React or Svelte, right? It's not. I'm using like one or the other. It's more like you can use React inside of Next.js or inside of Vite or inside of Astro. It's just kind of like a way for you to run it or like to build it or whatever. So like it's that's actually like why I'm personally like a fan of Astro, because they didn't came up with the idea of like we're going to compete with everyone and win. They came out with like we're going to collaborate with everyone and win, right? So that's like a big difference compared to some other solutions, because we actually have that like in docs somewhere. Like, could you use something else instead of React? Sure, like just go ahead and like rewrite it, and it will work the same. We're more comfortable with React. I think like the benefits, how do you say it? Like the benefits of something like Solid, which is like pretty close to what React does, right? Benefits of Solid are, on one hand, when you have like a static website that just needs one button, is like, why am I sending I forgot, like 77 kilobytes gzipped, I think, like the minimum amount of like what you can send in Next.js. Why am I sending this amount of JavaScript for one button? It's like, yeah, just use like React or Svelte or Solid or something like that for this kind of like thing. Or if you have really interactive application that has to show like 50,000 DOM nodes at the same time and everything has to be updated, it's like, yeah, that's where you like need to something more performant than React. But like for the most part, you're fine with React.
Oh yeah, that's I think that's React's winning slogan, more or less. That for the most part, you're fine with React.
Yes, they should print it on T-shirt.
Yeah. Also, it has what has it has most going for it is that if you look at JavaScript frameworks and JavaScript framework meta framework backends, then React is as big as all the rest combined. Actually, even more so. So yeah, and given that you're building on tools that should be popular tools, I definitely understand why you would pick React rather than something more, I don't know, opinionated, controversial, call it what you will, some other framework. You might make some developers really happy, but you'll probably shrink your addressable market.
Yeah. And we use Solid, by the way, like on the setup eject pages. We don't use like the whole Solid, but we use some libraries from it. It's like, yeah, it's like exactly the perfect kind of like trade-offs kind of like for that page. So going back to your like idea of like, so how does dynamic parts work? So one of the things that we do is when you go to prompts with friends /prompt and / like some public prompt ID, this page is going to be generated on the server using both Astro and React to generate like all the HTML that this page has, right? With all the like prompt information, user information, all that stuff. And so like, is that page dynamic or static? It's like it's generated like SSR. So this is like another kind of like split, I guess, like another another fork where you can go. And in Astro, it's pretty easy. For each route, you can set const pre-render equals like true or false, and that page will be generated, will be stored as static HTML on your hosting, and it will be like deployed through CDN like quickly. Or you can make it pre-render false, and it will make sure that like there's like a server rendering happening for this exact user with this exact cookie and all that stuff. And it will return maybe like a list of my prompts for this user from the server. So we have all of those hooks, all of those kind of like levers that you can pull again.
And if you go to the GitHub repo for the project, at the bottom, there are two sections. One, it's called, I think the section is called something about code. I don't know, understanding the code or digging into the code. So the first section, and there's an expand, and it's like a couple pages of like pretty dense material. First one is on database migrations, but the more interesting one is the second one on working with Astro and working with these like different types of rendering. And like literally while editing, Yaroslav wrote the first version of it. While editing that text, I learned so much personally. So it's a good read, I think, for someone who isn't, just like steeped in this world. Like I'm not, it's really incredibly informative. So I encourage anyone interested in like learning about client-side rendering or server-side rendering or static site generation, just to kind of like learn about the concepts, because it's really not that obvious, and it's hard to find good examples. But also like here's a framework, Astro, that actually kind of gives you ways to do all three in a pretty straightforward manner. And here's some examples. So I think it's a pretty good, like I think we need to extract that stuff out into a separate blog post, because it's really good, some good content. And again, like if this is not your world, it's a good place. Like I would say it's a pretty good place to learn about it.
Now you mentioned that portion also talks about the database, so I guess that's a good segue into asking you what you're using what's your database of choice, really?
Yeah, so we, because our background of like not using JavaScript on the backend, it was like a fun detour in like, okay, like how do people live in that, right? Because if you're using your own server, which is like what Epic Stack, for example, does, they use Fly.io, which gives you like real server. So you can do like anything you want. You can host like any database there. It's like a one world, right? If you use serverless, that's kind of like different limitations. You have problem of like cold starts and all that stuff. So you can't use like everything. You have to a bit like narrow down. And if you deploy to Edge, then it's like just like a few basically players in that kind of like area. So we picked kind of like what felt like the most extensible way of doing it. Again, kind of like playing more into that like flexibility and I'm sorry. So the idea is that we picked on Drizzle ORM, which is one of our like risky bets, because it's like it doesn't have like version 1.0 yet, but it felt like a nice middle ground, because it gives you all the type safety that you kind of like want from your ORM. So if you create like a user table and it has a name, that name is a string. You don't have to kind of like have as a string 1,000 times in your code base. It's like it's already a string. and it has some kind of like migration story that allows you to have like one of the steps that you're doing when you're setting this up locally. You run migrations, and it will set up everything for you, and like everything is going to work. We don't have you to click through like all the databases if you selected something like Firebase, right? Because it's more like UI oriented or whatever backend. And the Drizzle ORM allows you to connect to anything. We decided that Supabase is kind of like a good middle ground, because it's not, how do I say it? It has like a good kind of like serverless story, so you don't have to kind of like worry too much about how you're going to access it from like Vercel and all that stuff. And it's not limiting you kind of like in any way. So you're not losing anything in a sense. So like they allow you to do all of the kind of like Postgres extensions or whatever they call it. So like if you want to do machine learning or whatever, like they have all of that stuff. But again, because we're just connecting as like database URL, you can change it for something else and it will work. So
also picked Supabase because we met their co-founders,
yes.
And because it's a startup that raised some stupid money, like I don't know, $130 million.
Right.
But they're still a startup, and we thought that they would be willing potentially to promote the toolkit. So one of our kind of secondary objectives with these partners, quote unquote, that we were choosing was we were like, what's the probability that these folks will actually talk about this toolkit to their users, because they all have the same problem. They all need, for day zero, recently fired Google engineer to use their stuff, so that once it becomes a public company, they're like shoveling in the cash. So yeah, so like that was certainly a reason why we chose Supabase, is because we thought, hey, it's a startup, it's a YC startup, like we can talk to them. They're not, it's not Apple, it's not Google, they're human. And yeah, so far it's been okay. They haven't done too much to promote it, but they added a few likes here and there.
Right.
I think there's like about Supabase, there's a lot of kind of like preconceived notions, and I just want to kind of clear this a bit, because Supabase gives you everything. They have their own authentication, they have their own like file upload, like everything, right? Mm-hmm. And we only use database, basically like database URL. That's the only thing that we ever touch in Supabase. So we don't use like their SDK, we don't use their like CLI. We use it in pretty limited way. It doesn't mean that like someone who is using our kit like will not use more, because it's like, as again, we try to make it as flexible as possible. But for our use case, even for like, can I get a Postgres in the cloud? I think Supabase is kind of like the best solution for that, at least how we look at it.
I think the biggest backend component, the most interesting, is TRPC.
Yeah.
Like that's really the crux of.
Yeah, and I think like people who think of that we're building a website in Astro, they probably not think about TRPC.
Yeah, that's an interesting combination, I have to say. It's not one that immediately comes to mind.
We use Elixir in Fogbender, and it's not typed, right? And we're really, it's a trade-off. Like, okay, we use Elixir, it's not typed, and basically we're there's a lot of hand waving with what the client expects to receive from the server at the end of the day. And I've never felt great about it, but like, it's just something we've accepted for now as kind of a little piece of evil that we're dealing with. But it's, ideally, right, you would just have it typed on both ends. And so that's what TRPC gives you. And it actually, as a tutorial, right? Like as something that you're trying to convey to potentially a novice user, not having to hand wave in that particular area is unbelievably fantastic, right? Like, no, this is an integer and it's an integer here. No questions.
So a few thoughts about that, and they're like my thoughts or opinions, and not necessarily fully coalesced. So you can take them or leave them. First of all, it feels to me like TRPC is, or pretty soon will be, a technology looking for a home, in a sense, because most of the leading meta frameworks are going to have some sort of RPC solution baked in. So they'll not really be needing a third-party one, maybe except for Astro, by the way. So that's an interesting combination what you're having or you're using, because it, yeah, it's I- if you're going to be using Next.js going forward, you're probably going to be using React Server Components. If you're going to be using Quick or Solid, you're going to be using Server Dollar. It'll be interesting to see who will be using TRPC.
Just on that note, I think like yesterday or 2 days ago, React Query published like the new version with like full React Server component support. So I'm not as afraid for those technologies to disappear. It's actually like, yeah. Speaking of React Server components, I have like a lot of thoughts about it, and the easiest way to kind of like think about it is like, did Redux completely disappear once we had use reducer hook? It's like, not really. It disappeared in the places where it didn't make sense. So, but that's kind of like the extent of it.
Technologies don't disappear, especially on the web. But I think, you can argue merits and whether something is good, quote unquote, or bad, quote unquote. But, in the long run, if you're going to be using React, then my guess is 2 or 3 years from now, when you start a new project, you're going to be using React Server Components. Because if you're not, then why are you using React?
Yes, and I think that's true, but that's in the same case as like, are you going to use hooks? Yes, you will. But does that mean that your project is 100% is not going to have Redux? It doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, but I don't see I can see the use case. Again, maybe it's me, but I can kind of see the use case for React Query even with React Server Components. I don't really see the use case for TRPC with React Server Components.
Yeah, so I completely kind of like share your like concern about this. And when we were picking up TRPC, the same kind of like thought occurred to me as well. But I think there are like few ways to look at it. So one is it's probably going to be there. It's going to be just like compatible with React Server Components. And the other is, as you mentioned, because Astro doesn't have React Server Components, they have their own server components. It's probably going to change even slower in Astro compared to like Next.js.
Astro has islands, and that's something completely different. It's not so much about a data story; it's more about where you render stuff and when it's hydrated.
We use Astro for data story. That's the kind of like the point.
Yeah. Cool. It's interesting.
So going back to TRPC, because this question is like such a great question. I think the way to think TRPC is not like React replacement; it's like Express replacement.
Oh yeah.
When you have Express, you have all kinds of like middleware, and this is all of my routes that are here. This is like all of the context that this request needs and all of that stuff. This is what TRPC is solving. It allows you to structure your backend code in a way that is going to be safe. And then you can call that backend code from just like a plain API that you're like giving to some third party. You like the same function, right? You can call it from your front end with like gRPC or React Query kind of like library, right? Or you can call it from your back end that will check all the same cookies, that will check like so like the point how we use gRPC in Astro is that we have the same like procedure called in like from three different places, three different ways to show here's how you do it completely client side, here's how you do it during SSR, here's how you do it from remix loaders, so that when you like click on the page, it will not show up until the data from loader is there. And we do all of that through gRPC. So that's kind of like my bet.
Yeah,
on gRPC.
without going too deep, because it's probably a topic for an entire episode, and we only have a few minutes left. I think it's really interesting to see the web world kind of transitioning in a way from the approach of RESTful asynchronous APIs towards type safe synchronous APIs in the form of remote procedure calls or RPCs. And it's interesting. And there are several reasons why I think this is happening now. But I think, again, it's beyond the scope of this conversation.
In fact, I'm going to take this opportunity to move us right into the next section of the show. This has been really interesting, though. And I think a lot of times you talk about the little pieces. And so it's kind of interesting to talk about how the pieces kind of go together and how to think about pulling an app together. You know, whether you use B2B SaaS Kit or something else, or kind of piece it together yourself. So this has been really, really cool just to be part of. But yeah, let's go ahead and do our picks. Dan, do you want to start us off with picks?
Yes. So really, I wanted to pick 2 TV shows. So it's a funny thing in the context of updating our home network infrastructure. We also, switched some of our content providers, and I got Disney Plus for a month or two, just as a tryout period. And I took the chance to watch a couple of shows that I hadn't had the chance to watch before, specifically Loki and WandaVision.
Mm-hmm.
And they were fun. Not much more than that.
Right.
I liked Loki. I enjoyed WandaVision more. I found, I don't know. Again, Loki was fun, but the end was a bit disappointing for me, and at a certain point it got a bit messy and slightly repetitive. And WandaVision I enjoyed more. Maybe the whole concept of building a TV show around TV shows from different eras really resonated with me. So I liked that part. And it also kind of segued then into that movie. What's it called? The Doctor Strange one, which is kind of fun. I do think that the Marvel universe, or whatever they call it, is full of contradictions these days. It just doesn't make sense, all the concepts together, but it is what it is. So those 2 shows are my picks, for what they are. I'm probably not going to leverage Disney Plus to watch the various Star Wars stuff. It's just too much. And I just can't see myself trying to get into it all over again. But and to be honest, we're probably going to let it lapse. Once that month or 2 are over, I don't see us renewing. And other than that, the ongoing war in Ukraine, support the Ukrainian people, and the ongoing fight for democracy in Israel, support the Israelis fighting to keep the country a democracy. And those are my picks for today.
So, Dan, is it fair to say that your opinion of the Loki show is that it's low-key disappointing?
No, I don't think it's disappointing. I think that it's low-key pleasant.
Okay. Anyway, just thought I'd ask.
I think there's a pun in there that I didn't quite pick up on.
Lowkey, Lowkey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I also just, could the guy in the movie he killed like dozens of people in New York. He's responsible for so many deaths. And then all of a sudden he's a good guy. I mean,
Sounds like a John Wick movie.
yeah. With John Wick, I can't help myself but think, like, why don't they just throw a grenade at him?
He has one of those never-ending gun clips too, or magazines.
Ooh, I want one of those. All right, Steve, what are your picks?
So I found a pick that, in my opinion, is rather brilliant because it ties together Dan's past with a topic from today that came up early. And we were talking about meta frameworks, how you can just spin something up and it creates something for you. So TechCrunch found this on Hacker News, has an article about Wix's new tool can create entire websites from prompts. And apparently uses AI, and you can go in and say, it will let Wix users describe their intent and generate a website complete with the homepage, inner pages, and text and images, as well as business-specific sections for events, bookings, and more.
Yeah, it's not surprising, and it's not also totally new either. Maybe they added a lot of new AI-based features to it, but they had tools in that, that use that approach for a couple of years now. And they're also not the only ones doing it, but it kind of makes sense.
Oh, I'm sure they're not.
It kind of makes sense. I mean, machine learning kind of, it's what it's all about. I mean, you can describe a picture and it draws a picture, or paints a picture, whatever, generates a picture. But so why not the same with a website? And companies like Wix actually have an advantage because they own or manage a huge number of websites. So, and they know which ones work better and which ones don't. So if you want so they like have the vocabulary, they have the data that they can use to build the models from. That's what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha. Anyway, I just thought it was rather brilliant how it sort of tied multiple things together in one post. So I'll pat myself on the back for that. Okay, so for the dad jokes of the week, Yaroslav and Andrei, I'm sorry to subject you to this, but it's my big thing. So a turtle was crossing the road, and then he was assaulted by two snails. And when the police asked him what happened, the shaken turtle just said, "I don't know, man. It happened all so fast." So question of the day, or Jack Handy type of thought for those who are familiar with Saturday Night Live. If a vegetarian eats vegetables, what do humanitarians eat?
That is a solid question.
Yeah, it's a very solid question. Tasty one. And then finally, my doctor told me that I was suffering from paranoia. Well, he didn't actually, but I could tell that's what he was thinking. Boy, I didn't even get a smile out of Dan. Either that or his screen's frozen. Anyway, those are my picks.
All right. AJ, what are your picks?
So I just got one today. I just discovered this last night. There's a science woman whose name is Sabine, and she has a science news reel on YouTube where it's very concise and easy to digest. The subtitle of the channel is Science Without All the Gobbledygook. And it turns out that she has a book called Lost in Math, and the subtitle is basically something about how physics is going in the wrong direction. And she has a video about, is math real? And she makes a different point than I would make, but she redefines what real means or at least gives a definition of what real means before starting to say it. But she says that math is real. The math that describes the observable world in ways that enables us to make predictions is real, and math that does not fit that criteria cannot be considered real. And one point that she made that I thought was really, really interesting distinction is that among the real numbers, there's an infinite number of decimal places that you can have, but not all of those numbers are actually real numbers, because after a certain number of decimal places, the number cannot be used to describe an observation or make a prediction of something in the observable real world. So therefore, the number is not real. And I thought that was such a good point. And she talks about how all of this stuff with supersymmetry and the grand unified theory, and all of it is essentially religion, not science, and that we need to get back to science. And I love what she's saying about that. And I'm looking forward to listening more to her science newscasts, as well as learning more about her book. And I just thought she hit it spot on. We need people to be recognizing, to separate their religious views from their scientific views, and honestly recognize, okay, this is a religious belief system versus this is an observable fact or detail of the universe or the world.
Yeah, that's really true. My dad, who's a practical physicist, would get upset with some, theoretical physics theories that he would claim them as being more metaphysical than physical.
Yeah, it has to be falsifiable in order for it to be considered science.
Cool. All right, I'm going to jump in here, and then we'll have our guests throw out some picks. So I'm going to be fast. One thing, I keep getting people asking me about podcasting. I've actually been coaching some people about podcasting. So if you want me to walk you through the whole process of podcasting, front to back, soup to nuts, I'm going to be doing a 3-month podcast boot camp. It's going to be $2,500. Starts August 1st. If you're after that, you can still sign up. You just might have to do a little bit of catch up. And most of the stuff at the beginning is set up anyway. And so you can kind of hit that as you come upon the stuff. But some of the stuff, like getting your artwork rolling and working with your artwork artists and stuff like that, the stuff that you have to start early so that you can have it when you're ready to release. So if you're a little behind on that, then you can just do all the other stuff. And then when you get it, then you can start releasing. So it's not critical. It's just so that you can be releasing on the same time frame as everybody else. So yeah, go to topenddevs.com/podcasting. It's probably actually going to take you to podcastplaybook.com, which is where I'm putting all the podcast stuff. But I'm going to have a section specifically for podcasts about programming and technology as part of that, because I have some other friends who want to start podcasts that are not programmers and are not talking to programmers. So anyway, so if you're interested in any of that, let me know. Or just go to topenddevs.com/podcasting, like I said. And then the other picks I have. So a few weeks ago, we went to Disneyland. It seems like there was something like every dang week. And so we were at Disneyland, and then 4th of July, and then I was on Trek, which is basically a reenactment of handcart pioneers that came to Utah. And it's something the church puts on. And so I was there with a bunch of teenage kids. 4 of my kids actually went, but none of them were in my quote unquote family on that. And it was 95 degrees, so it was freaking hot. But yeah, so Disneyland was a ton of fun. I don't know if I made any picks related to that, so I'm just going to throw those out there real quick. And I know I didn't do a board game pick, but I didn't prep one, and I'm a little behind on that. So the first one is the Genie Pass. So Genie Plus Pass. If you go to Disneyland, I highly recommend you get it. Yeah, we had 7 people in our group, so it was a little bit expensive. But what it is before, when you'd go, you could get fast passes for free. You can't get fast passes for free anymore. That's what Genie Plus is. The nice thing is you run it through your app. So you just use the app, you reserve your place in line, and then you show up and you scan the barcode on your phone. Or what I did is I'd scan 7 barcodes on my phone, and then we'd all go through the fast line, right? And that was awesome. And it was a ton of fun. But the other thing is just for that, it's a little pricey. But the nice thing is it also includes the photo pass. And so the photo pass is you can stop any of the photographers that Disney has around the park and have them take your picture. and you get all those high quality pictures for free. And it also includes access to, they have an AI generated, it turns you into a villain or a hero or a character from the Disney movies, right? So it just overlays on your face on the phone, and you get that for free too, and you can save all those pictures. And so we had a ton of fun with that. So I'm going to pick that. One other thing that we did, and this was while we were in line, and it kind of depends on your group and what people are into, but my kids are way into Harry Potter. We were at Disneyland. They like Star Wars. So all that stuff. There's an app called Heads Up, and you just hold your phone above your head, facing out toward whoever's playing with you. And then they give you clues without saying any part of the word to get you to guess the thing, right? And so we're in the line for like Rise of the Resistance for an hour and a half. And so we were playing Heads Up the whole time, right? As long as I had battery, and as long as I actually carried one of those battery packs in my pocket, right? So I'd plug it in when it was going dead. But that worked out great. My kids just loved playing that game. Now the Harry Potter pack and the Star Wars pack and the Disney Parks pack and some of the other packs, I think I got for like $10. So the app is free, and it comes with like 5 packs. And then as you pick it, as you get in, then it says, do you want these other 100 packs or 50 packs for $10? And that's where all those were. So it was a lot of fun. Some of the other packs are like TV shows like Friends or Seinfeld or something. And so if you're with a group where you're all big fans of those franchises, you can play those. So I guess that's sort of a game, but it's more of a party game than a board game. But that made it a ton of fun. And so we did that. And then the last pick I have just basically is down to the way things worked out. So we flew on Delta, and whenever Delta overbooks a flight, they'll actually start offering travel credit for you to postpone your flight. And while we were getting ready to fly out, they called me up on my phone and said, we had to switch airplanes, and the airplane we switched to is smaller. So we need a lot of people to switch. So they gave us $300 per person to switch, which totaled to like $2,100 because my wife and I and our 5 kids. And so that worked out pretty nice. So my wife and I are now trying to figure out if we can make it to Italy on that.
Good luck.
So anyway, it's pretty fun. It should cover most of the airfare. So the rest of it's just the travel while we're there. But I have the added benefit of speaking Italian fluently. So we'll figure that out, and I can arrange some of that myself. But at the end of the day, yeah, it was a terrific trip, and I highly, highly recommend it. If you're going to go to get that Genie Plus pass going to Disney, and then, yeah, be flexible. But yeah, those are my picks.
So Chuck, one game we figured out when I was at Disney World with my kids, and they're, a little older, when you're waiting in line there like that, and you got an hour to burn, is we started airdrop bombing people around us, which is a ton of fun. So my son has these just tons of goofball pictures of dogs with weird looks on their faces and just all kinds of goofball stuff. And so we would start airdrop bombing people around us. And those are people that have iPhones with airdrop open to anybody outside their contacts. And pretty soon you start to see people looking around. Who's doing this? Who's photo bombing me? And my son was so good that there was one group of people right next to us in line, and he would take pictures of them and airdrop bomb them with their own pictures, and they still couldn't figure out who was doing it. So it was so funny. And I got hooked on it, and they tell me to knock it off. But anytime I'm on a plane or in an airport, I start doing that with goofball pictures. And you see some people accept them and some people reject them. And it's a lot of fun.
That sounds fun. So you just changed the name of your phone to...
Yeah, well, the name I have on my phone isn't like, Steve's iPhone or something like that.
Right.
It's different. So you'd have to really know who it is, to know that it's me. But when it's people walking by, in an airport at a gate, or people that are stuck on a plane, it's funny. I don't go to the extremes. There was a news story. I remember seeing this in the news probably 3-4 months ago about somebody on a plane that was doing that with like nude pics or something. And the pilot had to get on and say, well, whoever's doing that, please stop. So I won't get in trouble.
Yeah, that's over the line. But
yeah, that's a bit too far, but I keep it within the rules, and it's good times.
That sounds like fun. All right, Yaroslav, what are your picks?
I have a lot. So So first thing is that I recommend this book to anyone who is starting to learn programming, and I read it when I was programming for like 10 or 15 years, so it's still a good book. It's called Programmer's Brain. It's a bit the main kind of like takeaway for me is that a lot of programmers think of programming as just like swimming. You just were thrown in a pool and you figure out how to do it. And this is more about like how would you learn a language, right? So like here are like the actual kind of like science how to learn programming. So I really enjoyed that. It's called Programmer's Brain. And speaking of Sabine, I think her name is like a physics YouTube. I have another physics YouTube recommendation. So the best way to search for it, if you just search AI doesn't exist, but it will ruin everything anyway. So that's the last video she did. She's an astrophysicist, but she covers like different kind of like topics, and the last one was about AI, which is very cool. The thumbnail has her dressed as a clown, so you will figure it out right away. So one other pick is that August 3rd, there's a Remix meetup in Utah. So if you're in Utah, Charles, for example, you can join.
So is AJ.
It's in Lehigh, and you can find it on meetup.com. It's called I think it's called Remix Utah. Yeah. And if everything goes right, I should be presenting there and talking about React Server components. So that could be fun. And speaking about like meta frameworks, the term that I want to coin is hyper frameworks. So
that's a good one.
Yeah. So speaking of hyper, I want to plug HTMX, which is a really kind of like a thing that's kind of like doing rounds on Twitter and like everywhere. It's a very old take on very old problem. It used to be called Intercooler JS. It was like a jQuery plugin to which is kind of like it's half of the like live view or live wire like that things, and it's competing kind of like with turbolinks and all that stuff. But I think that the main idea is not like in the technology, it's more like just the way that you can think about the applications to build. So it's like it's compatible with like any framework. You can write like Astro, React, like whatever you want, but it's more about like how would you build a web application that is like driven by the backend, which is like live view is I forgot who mentioned it before, but like live view is a cool one, but requires you to buy into Elixir, and HTMX is kind of like a lighter version of it.
So we actually had Carson Gross, who's the creator of HTMX, as a guest on JavaScript Jabber quite a while ago. I think it was episode 5.3 or something like that. So it's definitely a really cool project. I really like that approach, being really lightweight and HTML centric rather than JavaScript centric.
Yeah, and what happened is that like I think like yesterday, the guy who is doing Million.js, Aiden, he posted on Twitter something like, "Hey, I created like a new integration with like React, and it has like refs instead of like ADs." So it's like I'm just curious to see like people trying it, and someone else on Twitter said like, I wonder if we can build like this in our framework and all that stuff. So I wonder if that's going to be like a thing that everyone kind of like wants to try. The same way how it happened with like Alpine.js back in the day.
Yeah.
We also did an episode on Million.js, so
very recently. Yeah.
Yes. So
okay, Andrei.
I met Carson Gross in San Francisco last week. He did a talk, and I gave him a PDF of the Joe Armstrong's Erlang book called The Software for a Concurrent World. Joe Armstrong gave me permission to spread that PDF. So even though it's probably illegal. I have permission to do it from Joe. Picks. All right. So a couple of apps. We a couple months ago drove to New York and back in an RV to pick up our oldest daughter from college, and she graduated. So like, we're not doing this again. And a really cool app. If you don't need to have an RV, but there's an app called iOverlander. It's completely free. It's basically a place where you can find places to stay, places to get water, places to, if you have tanks to dump, sewage. So it's a really cool app. You can leave notes and you can kind of see how recent the experience was. Another cool app is Greenlight. It's like a bank for kids. So if you have teenagers and they're now like both, they have like savings and they're in investment. These are small numbers, but it's a cool way to kind of learn a little bit of responsibility. And I recently saw 2 films, neither particularly great, but they kind of stood out. One is called Dragged Across Concrete with Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn. It's like so bad it's good kind of film. Beautiful photography, and pretty good dialogue. I think H. Craig, I don't remember the director's name. It doesn't really matter. The other one is called Greenberg. It's a pretty old film, like 10 years old, maybe 12 years old, starring Ben Stiller. It's so neurotic. It's I don't know. Good film, but kind of hard to watch. That's all. Those are my picks.
Awesome. Now, one last thing. If people want to follow you online or connect with you over any of this stuff, where do they find you?
So you can find Yaroslav as J Larkey on Twitter and GitHub. And you can find me as ABS on Twitter and GitHub.
Awesome.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. We'll wrap it up here. Till next time, Max out.